Hey there, welcome to part two of our discussion on magazines, chapter 5 in the book. So, one of the things that we want to continue talking about is various kinds of content in the 20th century and into the 21st century in magazines. And some of the key genres are what I'm going to identify in the next few slides. One of them is so-called entertainment magazines, often called fan magazines. And these started in the 1920s, 1930s, and continue up to this day. And some of the early ones were magazines like Photoplay, Picture Play, Movie Mirror, Movie Land, and later that led to magazines, more modern magazines like Entertainment Weekly, Rolling Stone magazine, and TV Guide. So entertainment magazines gave the public a chance to have behind the scenes look at the way stars lived their lives, the way TV shows and movies and other forms of entertainment were put together. Celebrity interviews were very popular. And they focused on not only that in terms of the editorial content, the stories, but also the ads too were geared towards entertaining people. And these are very popular, continue to be popular today. I thought I'd give you some samples of some covers from four of those things that we just listed above. TV Guide is one of those magazines that was extremely popular, particularly in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It's not has fallen a little bit out of favor now, but Entertainment Weekly is still going strong, and they tend to center on what's topical in the entertainment industry, whether it's current movies, current stars, and trying to give you an idea of what it's like if you were able to go on set or personally talk to these celebrities, which is a very appealing notion to lots of people. Another form or genre of magazine that has historically been very popular and continues to this day are teen magazines, which came about roughly in the mid-1940s. The people who produced magazines finally realized, as well as people in newspapers and television, that teenagers were a great source of revenue. They had lots of disposable income, cash. They'd earn allowance money or they worked jobs. And so beginning in the 1940s, magazines, particularly teenage magazines, started aiming their product directly at people who were interested in content that was designed for people their own age. In fact, pretty much the first big one was 17 magazine, which started in 1944. Of course, as you can see from the example, it looks totally different these days than it did back in 1944. It was a much more demure-looking type of magazine. Now, what a lot of these teen magazines have in common, as you can see from the covers, is that they're very, very full of colorful photos, splashy layouts. You have lots of headlines and type laying on top of photographs. They include things like contests, and quizzes, and some of the content repeats repeatedly over the years. Like, how many times can you talk about how to fix your hair, or who's going to be your summer love interest through their horoscope, or various ways to snag that teenage boy or girl that you might want to meet. But the repetitiveness is what got teenagers interested in it, because they were really interested in changing fashions, the new celebrities of the block, various new clothes, makeup, pop music, and a lot of other pop culture trends. So as pop culture trends and as all those other things kept showing up, there was a ready supply of content that changed on a fairly frequent basis. It may be the same story about what's the hottest clothing or fashion trends of the fall, but that would be different from the previous fall. So 17 in 1944 was a long time stay. When Tiger Beat was popular among girls when I was growing up, You can see the cover here is it included a wall-sized color poster of David Cassidy, who was on the Partridge Family, and ironically, David Cassidy just recently announced that he was having problems with dementia. So he's gotten up there in age a little bit. He's probably in his 60s, and he's suffering from some problems. There's a story about the Osmond brothers, including Bobby Osmond, and Susan Day, who was also on the Partridge Family. And of course, I think that's Bobby there flashing the peace sign. So very typical type of content. There's also Teen People magazine, where you're seeing the same kind of things. Sometimes they have guys on the cover too, not just women, and sort of really kind of sensationalized stories and headlines for them. Like I had to choose between my parents. So in some cases, these things, the content of these magazines did border on fan worship, and keeping up. It's how you kept up with fashions and trends and things like that. On the other hand, they do sometimes attack issues of some social interest, like what to do. I remember when they were various STD issues, they were trying to treat those in a positive, upbeat kind of way. Another one the textbook mentions is 16 magazine, and I don't remember that being very popular, but certainly 17, Tiger Beat, and Teen People, which is a spin-off from People magazine, were very popular and have been very popular in this teen magazine category. And as you can imagine, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are many, many, many more versions of teen magazines out there. So you see teen magazines, and later on we're going to talk about magazines intended for women and men. So some other types of genres: professional trade magazines dedicated to specific industries. Like I mentioned earlier in the first part of this section, if you want to find out about pig farming, you can probably find 6 or so magazines about pig farming. There's one at the bottom here called Nursing, and they are intended for nurses, so very content specific. If you want to find magazines on truck driving for professional truckers, those exist. Obviously, if you want to find magazines for marijuana use and growth and storage and issues on that, and there are several ones with those. So you get the idea. Professional trade magazines are intended for a very select niche kind of audience, which just means a special audience, whereas some people probably wouldn't pick up a copy of Nursing magazine unless they're a nurse or a doctor or somehow employed in the health field. So another thing, I don't have an illustration for this, but scholarly publications. So this is pretty much reputable journals. So when your teacher tells you that they want journal articles, they mean they don't want something from popular press like magazines that we're seeing here. These are popular literature. So usually it's well-researched articles in reputable journals. Reputable simply meaning that they've been around for a while, they've stood the test of time. There's some scientific rigor in how the results are published. A great example of that is Nature magazine or Science magazine. Pretty much every issue, there are major issues announced, discussed in each of those issues that affect a lot of people in the world. But it's still kind of intended for people who want to look at really detailed scientific data, not just read for pleasure. A lot of religious magazines out there, and I don't mean just strictly speaking ones, it does of course include like magazines directed toward Catholics and Methodists and Protestants and Buddhists, and you name the religion, there are magazines out there for every type of religion you can imagine, but also spin-off ones that are a little bit more oriented towards specialties, niches within niches. I'll give you an example here. There's a cover of a magazine called Worship Musician, and this is a sub-niche. This is within the Christian publishing community, a magazine that if you play for your church or you're a choral director for your church, and you might want to get to know some of the people that are well known in that field and read articles about everything from personality profiles, like this example, or technical articles on how to amplify and how to record performances and things like that. So there are even niches within niches. Political magazines, a couple of common ones: the American Prospect, which is very heavily slanted towards Democrats, and the American Conservative, which is really heavily slanted towards Republicans, and everything in between and all along the political stripe. So probably a bigger chunk is than all of these so far is hobby and special interest magazines. So I've given you a copy there of Diecast Collector. So you know those little metal trucks and cars and boats and planes that are produced that you kids get in gumball machines, but also you go to a real toy store and a custom toy store, and they sell these really accurate, like 1/64th scale models of airplanes and toys and things like that. Diecast just means it's done in metal. There are whole magazines devoted just to people that collect that stuff and want to know more and look up values and read interesting articles about other people that collect those things. So you name the hobby, and I can probably find you a magazine devoted to that. There's also a whole lot of interest in what are actually called, and don't be offended by these labels, but women's magazines and men's magazines. That's how they're termed in the industry. They're actually magazines that are in a niche where they're really directly aimed towards men or women. And a couple of good examples are Redbook. And Redbook is, most of the articles are about women and what women do and how you can do things. They tend to be a little bit more serious. A good example of a men's magazine is Men's Health. So if you want to know how to build a beach body, you can read that issue, or how to land your dream job. And you can, or I just saw this on the cover, live to be 120. I'm not sure I want to live to be that old. But women's magazines and men's magazines, actually, even when you go to a store that sells magazines, often that's how they're labeled, so that you don't waste your time in one spot when you really want to be in the other. And the latest thing, of course, is online magazines, and I want to talk about this from a couple of perspectives. First of all, Salon came out to be the first major online magazine in 1995. And it's still doing well. Other online magazines, and there are now dozens of these, but the book mentions Slate and PC Magazine. Online magazines where you can go and you don't have to wait for that month's issue to show up in your box. They're very appealing to a lot of people. You can, in most cases, when there's an online edition of a magazine, you can choose between digital only, in other words, receiving the magazine online but not a print copy, and that can lower your subscription price. And magazine companies like that too, and some people like that because it means you're not killing more trees in a process of producing something that people read and then usually throw away after a certain amount of time. Some readers still like old-fashioned print magazines, and they will keep them around for a long time, and they like the permanence of that. But they're slowly giving way to digital types of publications. And I subscribe to quite a few publications, and some of them I get online only, some of them I get in print issue because I want to preserve some of the articles a little bit easier. And some of them I have subscribed, and you get both when you subscribe to it. So that's the thing that's slightly changing. Online magazines can be the technology to produce good-looking ones and ones that work correctly on a variety of different media devices has grown quite a bit. So for example, if you it used to be that if you subscribe to a digital magazine, you had to view it on a regular computer. Nowadays, most of them now have versions, applications for cell phones, for tablets, for all kinds of special media devices so they can be consumed anywhere. And that's become the trend. So there is some trend towards going digital only because of the environmental repercussions, the fact that you're saving more natural resources, and also usually they can be offered to consumers at a slightly lower price. Trust me, they're still making a lot of money off of it, but those are people that are younger people that subscribe. It's one way to keep subscribers in the fold or add subscribers and build them if they don't want to wait. And usually, if you subscribe online, you will get a copy of the magazine. It'll show up as an email in your cell phone or on your printer or whatever, your computer or whatever, before you can actually get a printed copy of the magazine in the mail. The snapshot there you see is the website for Salon Magazine, their online version, and I just grabbed a random screen grab there. But they are also competing against some magazine websites. They're not really laid out like a magazine with pages, and in fact, Salons looks more to me like a magazine-like website than an actual magazine that you physically can flick across the screen and turn a page, which is becoming more and more popular. Thought I'd talk about this. You might be really surprised by some of these publications that are rated very highly in terms of circulation. This is one list. There's many different lists, and they're all generally the same, but not always. This is a list of the top 20 U.S. magazines by circulation, and the top two are published by AARP, American Association of Retired Persons. You know, the organization that if you're 55 or older, or maybe it's 50 and older, you can subscribe to their magazine and get all kinds of advice on investments and turning old and dealing with health issues and traveling, whatever else you might want. We have a aging population in America, and so as a result, an awful lot of people are joining and subscribing to this magazine to find out more about how to live their lives after they retire or right before they retire. So the figures there of circulation for AARP, the magazine, the general magazine, which you see advertised on TV a lot, is over 23. It's about 23.7 million subscribers. And if you take into account the fact that a lot of magazines, when they come to a house, will be viewed by anywhere from 4 to 10 people, 4 to 5 people, to 6 to 8 people, that means that that magazine is actually being read more than just by that many people. It's being read in multiples. The AARP Bulletin is also published, 23.5 million. And the Costco connection, we finally do have a Costco in Wichita as of a year or two ago. That is a magazine sent out to people that are subscribers or have the membership to Costco. More than 8 million people get that. And then finally, you might get some magazines you recognize, like Better Homes and Gardens, Reader's Digest, National Geographic with about 4.5 million subscribers. Good Housekeeping, Game Informer, and you might say, well, why is a publication about video games up there so high? Well, gaming has become an area of intense interest in this country, and this is one way you can look at societal trends in terms of what people are interested in by looking at magazines and seeing what is most popular from year to year. So if you were to want to do some kind of a research project, you could take a lot of these sets and this data and crunch it and then do some analysis, some interviews, and come up with a pretty good paper on why certain magazines or a certain magazine is growing in strength and popularity. A Women's Day and Family Circle and Ladies Home Journal, all of which are so-called women's magazines. People Magazine, Time Magazine, remember that's a news weekly. Taste of Home, I'm totally unfamiliar with that, but it's published by Reader's Digest. Sports Illustrated came in at number 15. I usually think that would probably come in a little higher, but again, that's sort of a niche. Not everybody's interested in sports. Not everybody in the country pays attention to all the issues in sports. Cosmo, Prevention, Southern Living, which has been around, is a very popular, very genteel type of magazine, very well designed, very well laid out. VIA, from the American Automobile Association, AAA in other words, and Maxim, which is more or less a men's magazine, but women read it too. So if you see the whole list, or if you ever care to go on the internet and look at these lists, usually the top 100. And you might say, whoa, I thought my magazine would be a lot higher than that. But you'll see that there's a lot of magazines that are populating up. Things like AARP and some of these other ones on this list have been at or near the top for a long time. And unless and until they go out of business for whatever reason, that's where they're going to stay. It's also interesting to see that some of these magazines are fairly long running. AARP, the magazine, was published in started publishing in 58, but if you go down to Geographic, its first issues came out in 1888, and then Good Housekeeping started in 1885, another women's magazine. So some of these have been around a while. Cosmopolitan, as we talked about earlier, has been around since 1886. And some are newer. Some are within the last 20, 25 years. So I just want to give you appreciation of in this chapter of the breadth of types of magazines that are out there. There's more information in the chapter about each one of these areas we've talked about in both of these videos. And I hope you get the chance to read the chapter itself and fill in some of the gaps. But until next we meet, I appreciate you listening in, and that concludes part 2, and that concludes our videos for this chapter.